Welcome to the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast, a production of the Flicksation Podcast Network.
Brewers down to their final out now. Now up to Christian Yelich. Here it is. Yelich sends one to right center and deep. Get up! Get up! Get out of here and gone for Yelich. He has tied the game with a booming home run. He got it all. Tied up.
Hey everyone, what's happening? Welcome to episode number 4 of the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast. My name is Eric Madsen. I'm here in Flicksation Studios, P City, Wisco, bringing you some Brewer talk tonight. Joining me from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Dr. Will Flanders. Doctor, how are you this evening?
Good evening. Glad we could get a chance to get this going again.
For sure. And over in Door County, Michael Smith, welcome back, man.
Good to be back and talk about something baseball related here.
The date of this recording, March 26th. This was meant to be opening day. So the way the news changes these days, who the hell knows what's going to happen between now and the time we release this show. So just know that everything was current when we talked about it here, but we are talking about it Thursday night in March. If you need to contact the show, you can do so. Our email is brewersrundown@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Brewers Weekly. Like our podcast on Facebook. Call or text our voicemail line anytime, 24/7. That's 608-535-9302. Head over to the place where you get our podcast and please give us a lofty star rating or a quick little review. That would help other folks find us. Currently, we're available on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Plex Podcasts, and iHeartRadio should be out any time now. We've crossed the month mark, so we are eligible to be on there. I would expect this episode should release on that platform. So you can check us out there if that's your spot. And coming very shortly, we will also be available on YouTube. All right, so yeah, a lot of stuff has happened, we can say, since the last time we spoke. We were 2 weeks into spring, we were raring to go, and then, of course, reality sunk in as the COVID-19 virus made its way overseas and is now ravaging its way through the U.S. Baseball, basketball, many other sports on indefinite hiatus for right now. It sounds like we're all sort of healthy here, so that's good news. How has life changed for you guys?
Yeah, it's certainly the craziest time I've ever lived through. Obviously the only comparison has been 9/11, but the longer we go, with this, the more it's just a unique circumstance, really, and certainly anyone who's alive. I don't know if there's anyone left who remembers the Spanish flu. There aren't too many. But yeah, I've been working from home the last few weeks. My building in Milwaukee was actually one of the first couple cases in the city. So fortunate to, have avoided that. But yeah, it's just, learning to use all these Zoom programs and, all these other programs and things to get work done from the house. But it's certainly a scary time. And, I knew I loved sports, but I never knew how much I missed sports till they're completely gone. So I think we're going to see, whenever we can get things going again, we're going to see, huge upticks in attendance and things. I think people just really miss those live events, and, seeing things from 20 years ago is cool, but it's certainly not the same thing.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, I am considered an essential occupation, so I am still out there in the public. Wisconsin here pretty much on a loose lockdown. They say you should stay home. Most people aren't. It is definitely slower out there than normal, but a lot of us still out there working, so hopefully we all stay healthy out there. But Yeah, not much has changed in my life too much. My wife also has an essential job, so we're both still going at it. Now it's a little harder to secure our child care, as our usual child care are people that are a little older, so we're trying to keep them away as, as we don't want to infect anybody because we're out there. So I've had to do some adaptations to the schedules, but yeah, for sure, the sports thing, really a bummer. Baseball is one of my favorite things in life, so this has been hard to take, but it is what it is, and I don't know, I just hope we get through it okay. Michael, how are things going for you over there?
Yeah, between me and my girlfriend, we've lost almost all of our income. Door County was more proactive than pretty much everywhere else in the state. They instructed visitors not to come. They told hotels to cancel reservations. Most businesses, the county board and everyone instructed them to close till the 30th. So there's a lot of people without jobs. There's not that many year-round residents to begin with, but they're afraid people would come up to their second homes and bring the virus with them or not quarantine themselves. They've also caused issues buying out all of our grocery stores. We're already low on supplies and not that many people live here this time of year, and now we're increasing our population. Door County still doesn't have a case reported yet, but it's probably still there. Then even side incomes I had related to the music industry, so that's pretty much a done deal as well, waiting on concerts and these events to happen.
Seems like that means the touristy places were pretty quick on it, as I'm just adjacent to Wisconsin Dells here, and they got way out in front of it as well, closed all the resorts and stuff down well over 2 weeks ago, so definitely helpful there. But yeah, very heavily staffed by tourist jobs and stuff, so yeah, kind of the same situation here. Yeah, obviously this season is shortened if it happens at all. So let's just take your initial gut feeling here, Will. Do you think there'll be baseball in 2020, and what's your rough guess on when that might be?
Yeah, so we have all the stats and all the different models, and obviously it depends on who you're listening to the extent that we think we'll be cresting in the next few weeks or a month, or if it's going to be something that I saw a CDC report that we may be continually having to go through different periods of social distancing throughout the year. So so much depends on that, and someone who's not an expert, it's hard to make a forecast. Trying to look at what's happened in other countries, it does seem that there's a peak, and it does seem that eventually you start to reduce the number of cases, which science says eventually will happen. So I guess my hopeful, my wishful thinking here is that I hear talk of June and July. I've seen other events moved into July and August. I think the Indy 500 today was moved to August from Memorial Day. So there does seem to be some sort of a targeting of the second half of summer. So I think, and I heard some talk about the All-Star break, being a time where we might be able to come back. So around the 4th of July. So that's my optimistic hope at the moment. Before I thought maybe May. I think I'm pretty wrong about that, given but basically everything that's in May has already been canceled at this point. But trying to be optimistic and sort of think about fun scenarios that I know we'll talk about tonight for how a shortened season could work.
Yeah, so we actually threw up a poll for this episode. Facebook, we haven't really run into this, but apparently they only allow 2 options. When you do a poll, I had a 4-question thing going, so I just had to whittle it down to, will there be a season, yes or no? And then I asked to comment if you did say yes on when you thought that might be. So right now, 74% believe there will be a 2020 baseball season. And everybody all over the map, May 1st. That's unlikely, but somebody thinks that. June 1st, July 3rd, July 4th, Memorial Day weekend. We are all over the place. So, I mean, it is what it is. Personally, I do also believe we will probably have a 2020 baseball season. I would be extremely surprised if it started before like the third or fourth week in June, but I'm guessing we're going to start right around the All-Star break. We can throw around for scenarios on how they might lay this out, but yeah, I mean, you figure you need at least a couple of weeks to get ready. They're not just going to call it and start playing games in a week. I don't know how much time they'll take. Do you think they got to be done with Arizona at this point, right? If we're going to have some kind of exhibition season, you would think at this point it would just be in Milwaukee and maybe like with adjacent teams or something.
I mean, that would be my guess. I think it doesn't seem worthwhile to move the whole thing back to Arizona and Florida for the teams, given that it's not just the teams that move, but there's a whole set of staff and other folks that would have to come along as well. I did see some GMs saying they would need at least a month to prepare. I forget where I saw that. There's so many things going around. So that, that sets the date back even further and makes things even more questionable if it really, in fact, takes that long. Maybe there's some other remedies we can discuss for that. But, I wouldn't see a reason to move back to Arizona and Florida, I wouldn't think.
And then that adds all kind of logistical things like minor leaguers and camp invitees and all this other stuff. What the hell are we going to do there? We can come back to that in a second. But, Michael, what do you think? 2020 season here.
It's really tough to say. I think my gut says there's not going to be a season, or maybe they start the season and it doesn't finish. I don't see any possibility that there's any regular season major league game before July 1st. But it could also have that kind of calming effect if baseball could get up and going again, and that would really be a return to normalcy for a lot of people. I think it could be a big thing, but you have to keep in mind how many players are on the roster too, and one player in baseball could be asymptomatic and spread it around even after the curve has been flattened a little bit when it returns again, and that could create pretty big problems. There's definitely a lot of logistics that go into it. My biggest concern would be them actually finishing it if they do start it. I mean, the NFL was talking about a delayed or late start, and that's not even really taking preseason into account. So if that's a league that's already starting around September,
at Labor Day, right?
Now we have to take that into consideration with baseball too.
Yeah, definitely a realistic possibility. I'm trying not to focus on that for now, but I think if we do get play, even if it's as late as July, I think it's a very strong possibility it may run for some time without crowds. I mean, if you just take into account personnel and players and all that stuff, I mean, you're probably over 100 people and then you get into broadcasting and camera crews and all that other stuff. So I guess I can see a scenario where they might even have to focus on some specific neutral sites in the same area to keep people from traveling so much. I don't know. It's the more I talk about it, the more I think Michael might be right. But I'm not going to go there yet. But anyway, I think there's a very strong possibility that we could see play without the public for a while, which not a lot of people are going to want to hear. But I would take that over nothing. One guy in the comment thread said, even if they could squeeze out a 30-game season, he would be happy with whatever. I agree. I don't think that would happen. I think we get anywhere down past 100, maybe. I'll even cut it in half and be that generous. But I think if it gets below that for games played, it probably wouldn't happen. I don't know. So
Yeah, 81 we were at during the strike shortened season we were 109, 110. The 95 season had more games than that. So I think that's the shortest season that baseball's had in the modern era, was around that 110 mark. So, I think you're right. If you're getting, down to half that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what are we worried about at that point? Like, if we can have a 30-game season, obviously the records and everything are already out the window, right? The
Already,
season
yeah,
records.
yeah, already.
Yeah. So I mean, the only thing would, I guess, be like if you're worried about someone hitting 400 over a 30-game season, where we put that in like the historical context. But other than things like that, I mean, it'd just be something with an asterisk, right? And I'd say, play as many games as you can when it's safe. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, was the reason that everything got canceled primarily because of Rudy Gobert, or was it because or played without crowds? Because that was the original plan, right? That's what we heard 3 weeks ago. Was it the prospect of players getting the illness, or was it the prospect of just it wouldn't look good without the fans in place? I was never quite sure if it was just the Rudy Gobert thing or if it was other things that led to that decision. Just the optics look terrible. And then what do you do if you have a positive test, right? You can't really cancel a team's games for a month, right? And you have to, and all the teams they played would have to go into quarantine. So that's where the logistics, as you were saying, just get absurd. Like, it's, unless we've totally curbed things, unless we're down to minimal cases, that's where we get a little bit in the realm of what Michael was saying. So,
All right, so let's say, well, just overall, what do you think would be any advantages or disadvantages for specifically the Brewers? Well, obviously it's probably going to be a shortened season at this point. I'm not buying, I mean, I guess before we go into that, we can talk about this a little bit. I'm not buying any kind of crazy, I just see lesser games. I don't think there's going to be double headers, 7-inning games, no days off, stuff like that. So I don't know if what they do is up in the air. I don't know if they'll just assume the schedule where it begins. I don't know if they'll reshuffle to get divisional games worked out or whatever. But once you're sure you're not going to play 162 games, who cares how many games there are? Take it at a regular pace. I don't want to see November baseball in Minnesota or something like that.
no, I mean, so I guess my thought is, and I kind of find the idea of bringing back a Sunday doubleheader kind of a fun idea. One idea I saw out there was, make the first game a 7-inning game and then make the second game a full 9-inning game. I know it gets a little bit funky and it's a little bit different, but as someone who sort of appreciates the history of the game sometimes, I think that might be an interesting thing to bring back. Of course, the caveat is in 1950, games were 2 hours and you had one pitcher. Right now we have 3.5-hour games and we use 6 pitchers a game. So that makes scheduled doubleheaders a little more challenging. Maybe you could talk about further roster expansion for those Sunday games. You already got one extra player for a doubleheader. Maybe we could go to 28 or 29 players for those games. But I like the idea of getting as many games as possible in order that we don't have to play late November in Minnesota, right? So get a few more games in earlier so that we're not in those cold places so late in the year.
Right. So 2001, when there was a week stoppage for the 9/11 thing, they did push everything back a week. Well, I think they took that week and moved it to the end of the schedule, and then they ran the postseason into early November, which I guess I'm okay with, like one week. I don't even know if 2 is a good idea, unless you're moving games out of cold regions. I don't. So yeah, Michael, what are your thoughts on all this? You would think there probably won't be a season, but just pretend there will be for now. Say July. What do you think? 80 some games?
60. I'd probably go with 60. I think to answer Will's question, like before going into it, I'm not going to say there's no optics. I feel like there's a little bit of optics, but they didn't have, the ability to look back and see how badly things progressed, and then we're like, well, maybe some viewers would be better than none. But it's more now about not spreading it, protecting their players, which are their assets. But at this point, I think you just get in as many games as you can get in. I don't think they're going to start a season if they don't think they can finish it, though. And then they have to decide if they do finish it, if they're going to have a postseason, and how many games is their threshold ahead of time, and all that. But I think some of that could work out, but I think you just have so many different markets, and some of the bigger markets in baseball right now are some of the ones that are more widely affected by this. So maybe they do lower their curve by then, but I think it's some of the other ones that are catching up now that maybe theirs doesn't spike for another month or so, because we're not all on the same page across the country in different jurisdictions and stuff. Like, it's being handled differently in different places. Different places have different resources. I do think logistically, like you were talking about, having some venues that are neutral or whatever, it would almost have to be a necessity. But I think the only way you could do it is to start at some point with no crowds and see what happens. But it doesn't take much for one player to get it at that point.
Right.
But I'd like to stay optimistic about it as much as possible. But I think baseball's had some questionable decisions lately, but I kind of feel like they'll make the right one on this. Like, if it's not totally right to start, I don't think they're going to force the issue. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah. I guess if you're crowdless, neutral sites really don't make much of a difference, right? So, yeah, I don't know, guys. So hope everybody out there stays well and stays safe. Hopefully we can get some baseball going here eventually. And the unfortunate part of flattening the curve is it does extend the life, as it doesn't peak quickly and then go away. It kind of hangs around because the curve has been flattened. But yeah, we'll see how it goes, and hope for the best. Let's talk about kind of how things broke at camp and what you guys took out of the shortened spring training season that we had here. A couple of guys pushed down to AAA since camp has been shut down. Ryan Healy, the most notable one, we kind of expected him on the 26-man roster. So, and I think, Will, you were actually flirting with him as your possible dark horse player. So, any surprises here that Healy's down, Will?
Yeah, so I think it was always going to be a struggle to fit all these pieces together, and the bottom line is Healy was struggling pretty hard in spring training so far. A 208 on base percentage, 174 batting average. So I think they were basing that, but potentially on the small sample size. But again, we discussed how are we going to fit this puzzle together, and having him in AAA, as someone who potentially could come up, in a pinch, I think is it's not an unforeseen, possibility this would happen. Though I do regret that my early pick is turning out to be wrong here. But I think you might see him in the future if we do get the season started.
Not really a surprise for me. I do think it's a player, depending on how they do the rosters. Maybe they give September rosters for the whole season. If it's a shortened season, that could be a possibility. So we have a few extra players, but I always saw Healy as, he's a depth piece, and someone with options can be brought up and down, just like Gamel. I think some of these small sample sizes with players too will be interesting to see if there was a season, and if it starts, that who gets the nod. I think Morrison becomes even more intriguing now. And now, they're not playing the full year, so you could probably get a better deal on him, and maybe you just do that as a depth piece just to keep anyone else from getting him. And I think when you start a season this late, there's a lot of players that aren't going to be able to afford to have a slow start, because we have guys that can replace them pretty quickly the way we're built. So, but maybe there you go for an extra first baseman / outfielder there but then you're stuck with having to send him down or trade him if he's out of options. But maybe you have to protect your roster builder a little differently. Soon you're kind of hedged on multiple guys, seeing if they can start hot.
think, if I'm not mistaken, 35 was the number I read today, that was the roster size for the first month of the strike-shortened season in 95. So that's a possible number. Or maybe they'll stick to their new September number this time. Probably more likely than all the way up to 35. But, yeah, that is all intriguing stuff for sure. I did feel like, I don't know, I felt like Brock Holt, when he got signed, kind of kicked Healy out the side door. It's kind of the way I felt. But with spring, you never know. Yeah, he pretty much underperformed for the most part. So if we do have, we do have a shortened season, if we have one. Before we talk about the camp stuff, what do you guys see as advantages or disadvantages for the Brewers specifically in a shortened season? Overall, do you think it helps them? Do you think it hurts them? And what might be their strengths and weaknesses in a short season?
So I think the way that Council likes to use the bullpen, I think that there's a potential advantage there. What we see, I mean, we don't necessarily see that, at the end of the year that the bullpen's gassed. The bullpen in September really carried us to the playoffs. But I do think that, given the new roster construction, and we were just talking about the size of the roster, we don't know what it would be. But, having less innings on some of those arms, it might let you get a couple more innings out of the starter, and it definitely could let you get a few more appearances out of the bullpen because they haven't been being abused, since late March. So I think that's one potential advantage that a team that's constructed like the Brewers with a sort of weak or at least average or below average starting rotation and a pretty strong bullpen could have. The other thing is, when you have a shortened season, there's more room for just random occurrences. Teams get hot, and that hot streak can carry you through a 80-game season potentially, or at least give you a big advantage in an 80-game season. If we're down to a 30-game season, just think about a team like the Indians that won 22 straight games a couple years ago, right? That's 2/3 of the season. So a streak like that is possible in a very short season.
Just think of
introduce a lot
the Nationals from last year, how terrible their first half was. I mean, they're in a half season, that team doesn't get anywhere near the playoffs. So
exactly. So I think that it's just there's a lot of randomness that'll come into it. It might make for a fun season. You might see a team that we really think is out of it come to the front, and for a team like the Brewers, that's we're probably an above average team. There's certainly the chance we shoot to the top, and then there's the chance that it could go the other way as well, without having the chance to make up for it in a longer year.
Yeah, I feel like a shortened season for the Brewers just feels like an advantage for a team that's kind of thought of as one of the smarter teams in the league. And yeah, just the way they handle their personnel and such. The one thing I totally agree with you, Will, on the bullpen being the strength and giving you an advantage here, but I guess if they do some kind of thing where they're packing in games and all these double headers and stuff, even if they have a expanded roster, that worries me because, as a team that typically asks 5 innings, usually less of a starter, and relies so heavily on your bullpen, I think days off are extremely important for this team to recharge pitching batteries especially. So if there's some kind of crazy too many games and too much time, I think there's a union rule, I believe, where you can't play more than 20 days in a row. I looked at it last year. The Brewers had an 18-game-in-a-row streak, but that was the only one of that length. So it doesn't happen very often. But that was also some of the Brewers' worst performances in that 18-game stretch.
Getting destroyed by the Pirates at the end there was probably the nightmare of that season.
Yeah. So again, I think a shortened season. I just feel like it is an advantage to a team like the Brewers. Maybe a team like Tampa, too, would benefit from something like that. Whereas a conventionally built baseball team might have a little more trouble getting into the groove of a short season and whatnot. But we'll have to see. no idea what they'll do for rosters or even a schedule. So all speculation, obviously, but I feel like it's at least a mild advantage for a team like the Brewers.
I also think it'd be a pretty big advantage for a team like the Brewers. The roster size would definitely be a pretty important factor, but say it's 30 or above, I feel like we probably have one of the best depths to have one of the most solid roster there. We could have multiple, number 6 starters or whatever that are hybrid bullpen guys / they can start a game and we'll just shuffle through whoever's performing the best at the time, move the other person to the bullpen, and then with the position players, having 2 of almost every infielder and then even depth in catcher, that if someone starts hot, they can keep with him or they can just change him out real easy. But people also be fighting for playing time, and getting a good start in a shortened season is just absolutely essential. But the Brewers also have the chemistry. Yeah, we have some new faces, but a lot of these guys have been together for several seasons now. I think they're pretty used to each other. They're used to Counsell, and I think that's a big advantage too. And having been there in the playoffs and knowing that when the second half gets in or after the All-Star break, the Brewers have been pretty good. So, we start after the All-Star break, maybe we can just hit the switch right from the get and
yeah, that'd be nice.
Happens.
All right, so as we round out talking about camp here, I guess I'll just go through a few bullet points that I have, and then we can throw it to you guys to see if you have anything else to add. So one thing, I guess, that we haven't really talked about yet that I don't know if worried me is exactly the right phrase, but it is a bit disappointing. It seems as though Keston Hiura really hasn't made much leeway with his defensive ability. Had a really bad game there near the end. A number of errors. A couple of times he had double errors where he misplayed the ball and then threw it away. So I know 90-10 here. His bat kind of erases somewhat his defensive skill or whatever. But do you guys, especially in a shortened season, where games are going to mean a lot more than we're used to, do you see a lot of scenarios where Counsell's going to have to go to a defensive replacement the 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th inning in a one-run game in a must-win situation? I feel like it's a possibility. I don't know how much they would pull the trigger on that, because then, when that spot in the order comes up, you'd like to have his bat up there. But it's definitely something that's worrying me, Michael, at this point, because it doesn't seem like he's making much progress there.
It's still a small sample size for me. He just hasn't played that position that long. I think, realistically, whether there's a season this year or not, if there is, that we can get through it with him and know that if he doesn't figure it out, we're probably planning on the DH coming pretty soon. But I definitely do think Counsell thinks about changing him out. But if he starts slow with the bat too, Bolt can easily get penciled in real quickly. So it doesn't matter who you are on the team in a shortened season. Your room for error and everything is a lot smaller, especially with more players and they're all battling for playing time. But I don't know. I still have some faith in him, but after the 7th inning with a 3-run lead or more, yeah, I think you might take out his bat. Otherwise, you kind of need his bat, but we're so deep that you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I mean, you could plug Sogard or Urias in over there as well. So
Mike is right. It's a small sample size, and you try not to get too worked up over spring training. That maybe they're, I guess, not on the defensive side as much, that you might be trying different things, right? You're trying to field the ball and get the play, so that's not so much of a concern as it might be on offense or for a pitcher or a possibility. More and more, I'm thinking his long-term future might be at a corner position, or maybe as Mike said, if we get the DH in 2021 or 2022, that might become more of a possibility for him. I would like to give it a couple. Give it this season and see how it goes. But I think you're right. We didn't see much evidence in spring training that there was any sort of big improvement in that side of the game. Also, the strikeout rate, even though he was getting on base, or at least they hit a good amount. The strikeout rate, 6 strikeouts and 26 at bats. We're at about 1 in 4 there. I know when you look at things like Baseball Prospectus and some of those sources that were a little bit down on him for this year, they're saying that's that strikeout rate is going to come to the fore. So I'm not down on Hira by any means. I think he's still going to be a very productive offensive player. But I definitely agree with you that there's still a concern there that hasn't been fully addressed.
It seems like, and all this could reset, obviously. Who the hell knows what's going to happen in 2 months or whenever we get this thing going, if we do. But it seems like we had kind of a surprise at the bottom of the rotation. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know if it was a surprise because these guys were always in the mix. But it kind of turned out that you had Lauer, Peralta, and Burnes shuffling around for that 5th starter spot. I still think it was probably going to be Peralta, but Lauer not having a great spring, but doing all right. And Corbin Burnes, pretty much unhittable in 10 innings of work this year. So any surprises here, Will, or did you kind of see this working out this way?
And I think Burnes is, as we talked about here, there's a little bit more concern than we started camp with maybe. I think Burnes has got to be the best surprise, and I think Mike deserves credit for seeing that. I'm not sure, I was hopeful, but I wasn't so hopeful that he'd be as good as he was. I mean, a whip under 1. I know it's again a small sample size. Everything needs that caveat, right? I've got to repeat it over and over again of a small sample, but he looked like 2018 Burnes again, and that's in a starting role, right? So he looked like the stuff he had in 2018 in a starting role. So it seems he's got his issues under control. Given that it was a lot of mental issues, more so than physical issues, you'd like to see, whether that can continue into the regular season. But no reason not to be hopeful for Burnes getting back on track this year, I think, from what we saw in spring.
But Mike, yeah, you knew it all along, right?
I felt pretty good there was a spot for him on the roster. I don't know if it's necessarily in the rotation, but I definitely thought he was an opening day starter. 2 other things we have to consider is with Lauer, he was looking at being injured and maybe missing some time. So now we have a chance to recapture that. And the other thing we haven't even mentioned is Knebel had gotten pushed back. And now if we do have a shortened season and all of us are predicting around July, that means we could actually start the season with him. And that's, in a few ways, that's with the injuries, that actually benefits us pretty well.
Yeah, definitely, assuming he comes back close to where he left off. Yeah, that was definitely a good point. So, Burnes, guys, one of my favorite websites that just focuses on pitchers, almost specifically, is Pitchers List. I do say you should go check it out if that's something that interests you. But they had a really good article from right at the end of October, early November last year that I just ran across the other day. And it kind of fascinated me as they were really cheering positive on Corbin Burnes and his potential here. So they put some pretty good numbers in here, and I wanted to present some of these. So now this is all 2019 numbers, unless mentioned otherwise. So this is 2019 we're talking about. So of all major league pitchers in 2019, and all pitches thrown more than 250 times. Okay, so that's the metric we're using here. I'm going to talk specifically about Burnes' slider. All right, so of pitches thrown 250 times, Burnes' slider's whiff rate is 35%, and that is the highest whiff rate of any pitch in the major leagues in 2019. Yep, so you heard that right. The highest whiff rate of any pitch in the major leagues thrown over 250 times last year. Corbin Burnes at 35%. He throws
But
it
he threw 10% less sliders last year was part of the issue.
right.
And with him recapturing that, that's another positive sign.
Right. Last year he threw it 31% of the time. His K rate with the slider was 52%, which is the fifth best slider in the major leagues in 2019. Batting average against his slider was 161. That was also in the top 20 for sliders last year. So what was the problem? His ERA last year coming in at 8.82. Clearly the problem as presented by those guys here, who are very, very much on the side of they think his slider is definitely one of the best pitches in the major leagues. And the problem here that they think is just his fastball. Clearly getting clobbered last year. His hard hit rate in 2018 on his fastball specifically was 31.4%. In 2019, that moved up 10 points to a hard hit rate of 41.3%. So what's the problem? So if you look at his spin rate, he's got one of the best spin rates on both his slider and fastball in the league. So they actually drew a comparison of fastballs here between Corbin Burnes and Verlander. So number of fastballs thrown. Obviously, Verlander's going to have this by a long shot, but 474 to 1614. Corbin Burnes' fastball averaged at 95.6 miles per hour. Verlander's average was 94.6. So Burnes with a little bit of an edge there. Spin rate almost identical. 2572 for Burnes, 2577 for Verlander. So what's the problem? The problem is the movement of the fastball. Verlander's has way more movement, and Burnes last year was flat. So he was had almost no movement with the same spin rate, so it is some kind of release point issue on his fastball. Is the contention they make here. Sounds about right to me. I don't know. I know some people have thought that Burnes was kind of a victim of the juiced ball. That could be. I don't know. So anyway, the conclusion they're drawing here is if he can get the movement back on his fastball, they think Burnes could pretty much be an elite level pitcher here. He's already got one of, if not the best pitch in the major leagues according to these numbers. So I was just fascinated by this whole article. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, Will, but I know maybe you were one pushing the juice ball theory here.
Yeah, I think so, and that is a fascinating piece. I think when he was in the reliever role, there's the potential that getting by with a fastball, and it'd be interesting to compare that to 2018 to see how the sort of fastball stats compare in 2018 to 2019. But can get away with we can get away with just relying more on the slider, as you guys were talking about. In the starting role, you need to mix it up a little more potentially, or maybe you don't. There's some school of thought out there that relying on breaking pitches more for even starting pitchers is the way to go. But that's definitely encouraging, and given the potential for adjustments. I said it was mostly mental last year. Maybe I should amend that statement and say maybe there is some level of physical adjustment that needs to be made. But yeah, definitely encouraging numbers there, and the potential that maybe going back to heavier reliance on the slider coupled with a little more, little adjustments to the fastball, maybe he'll be back on track.
Yeah, and I did actually read that he has spent extensive time with sports psychologists in the off season, so maybe that's partly why he seems to be improving, at least from last year.
Your assessment is pretty dead on, but I've just kind of felt the same way for a while. I mean, there's some articles and rankings in baseball about midway through the season last year that Burnes had the worst or the second worst fastball in baseball, and a lot of people are focused on that spin rate now, but as you laid out in a comparison, the spin rate was there, but it just didn't get movement, and he wasn't locating it. And he was getting hit, and he was getting hit hard, and he was getting hit hard up in the zone too. And I think that philosophy early in the season, we kind of forget with the pitching coach change, but some people did better with that and some didn't. I mean, Chacin is gone from the team. Burnes got absolutely rocked. There's some pitchers in their system that didn't do real well with that, and his fastball just wasn't moving. But with that, I think with Grandal behind the plate last year and just our aggressive nature with having Hader there and everyone else, I think there's just a lot more fastballs called, as you said, and chirped in a lot of numbers I saw. He threw about 10% less sliders, and with that, you're getting more predictable. Guys are sitting on fastball, and then it's a meatball because you're not getting any movement, and the spin's not deceiving your eye or whatever because it's little movement, and he was getting hit hard. But I think, as you said, a release point that's fixable, But mixing it up and then getting the psychology right and everything else, that's a big thing. But if the spin rate's there and it's just not getting the movement, I think that's a lot better than a guy who just can't find the zone or is losing a ton of velocity or all these other issues. And I think that's why a lot of people are high on him, and including myself, to at least make the team. But as Will said, with the rotation, like that's a big deal too, because in the bullpen you can try to get by some fastballs here or there, and maybe you don't mix it up as much or whatever, but you definitely have to mix it up more as a starter. But he definitely got hit hard when he got hit last season, but I'm still optimistic on Burnes figuring this out.
There is some element of bad luck in that as well. I mean, you look at the batting average on balls in play numbers for Burnes. So, on average, when a ball is hit, it's about a 300 batting average when there's actually contact. Last year for Burnes, it was over 400. So hitters, when they put a ball in play, were hitting 414 against him. Compared to 2018, they were hitting 232 against him. So that's a swing of 170 points, which is just insane. So there's a lot of, this is another reason to just be a little optimistic. Obviously there are tons of issues there. The ball, the release point, the move to the rotation, and not being able to rely on the slider as much. But there's also an element of bad luck that may have just sort of snowballed into some bigger issues over time as well.
Yeah. So let's hope Burnes keeps it up and gets back to 2018 form. Otherwise, the only other thing I'll say for camp here is I got a feeling, I'm going to make a prediction, we do give Morrison a 1-year contract here. I believe at this point, I see expanded rosters. I'd put pretty good amount of money on it, I think, at this point. So, Will, what do you think? Yes? You going to take that bet?
So I feel like everything we discussed, I've shown my predictive abilities are failing here. I'm glad we didn't do any actual bets on our predictions so far. But as you said, given the special circumstances, if we don't know what they'll be, but the fact that it may even have more players on the roster, and what's happened with Healy being sent down, as well as Ronnie Rodriguez sent down as well. That's freed up some of that middle infield space. It's suggests there's more room on the roster for Morrison. So I think the fans that voted and overwhelmingly thought that he might make the team a couple weeks ago when we had that poll, I think they might turn out to be right after all.
Without a shortened season, I don't think they'd have been right. But yeah, might get it. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I don't think in a shortened season that he'd necessarily be on, but now, a prorated salary is not going to be that much if they were to start this season. And you keep him not only for depth, but in this situation, just to prevent any other team from getting him, honestly.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of a protective and gamesmanship type move, but I think you'd have to really consider it, especially half the season's, half the cost, and it's just not much risk. And Yeah, I think that would probably be the right move to make, assuming there's expanded rosters. Even without expanded rosters, though, I think they still probably would
Yeah, I
with the
still think
shortened
so
season at
too.
this point.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that's all I got for camp. Will, any thoughts? Anything else to add here from camp?
No, I think the way to keep optimistic on things is to think about ways that we can make this season fun. So I'm glad we're able to discuss some of those tonight. And maybe as things become more clear at some point, there'll be more room to get back into baseball talk again. So it's good just to talk about some baseball things, as we said at the beginning, get our mind off all the negative news out there at the moment.
I still like the idea that a couple of the injuries we had, if the season starts late, we have time to heal those and kind of be at full health from the beginning. And some of these other players, they're still going to continue to work out by themselves and do what they need to do to get in shape. But, it also makes us appreciate something that we take for granted in baseball, that even baseball, that's the one thing I think a lot of baseball fans depend on every year, no matter how bad things are in the world, all the way from politics to your life locally to everything. You always have that baseball season to count on and take your mind off it and really put yourself into it. And not having it this year on top of everything that's going on, it's definitely been a tough time for a lot of people. But I think it'll make us appreciate and love it just as much when it comes back, if not more, and really get normalcy back.
And for me personally, I think I alluded to this before, but very interested to see how a shortened season plays out with aggressiveness and all that other stuff involved. It's something we don't see very often. Who knows? We might see it 2 seasons in a row with the looming collective bargaining agreement on the horizon here. But I'm excited. Hopefully this we get some baseball this year. I'm not gonna. Would I be terribly surprised if we didn't? No, but be disappointed for sure. So I guess might as well just ask this question. I would assume we're just, no matter what happens at this point. I mean, because we'll probably have Urias healthy, so RC has pretty much won the right to start here, at least at the beginning, without too much competition, at least at the very beginning.
I think so, at least for the first few games. But and the advantage of Arcia starting early in the season is he is a guy that does have some history starting off pretty good, not just in spring training but the regular season. And he doesn't usually sustain that, but I think you'd have to give him the nod with that situation, and just Urias not really taking. He didn't get any live at bats in a game. I don't think he was back in the cage and taking live BP, but he didn't get into a whole lot of game playing where it was beyond practice. But RCA would probably get the nod there with that.
Yeah, short leash probably, but
yeah, I agree with that assessment. Given that he didn't get to play, I think there's the only question to me would be, as a young prospect, do you want him to be getting at bats? And if Arcia earned the starting job, do you want him in AAA to start the year just to make sure he's actually getting playing time? I assume he would be on the roster, but that's the only thing I could really see. Arcia is super streaky, we know that, and it's kind of among many other reasons that are far worse. It's too bad for Arcia that he wasn't able to keep that momentum going, because who knows what kind of how he'll be hitting it when we do come back. But I think Arcia has earned the chance to start, certainly. Now, if we do have a month of training beforehand when things start again, then that could change.
Well, I guess that's all we got for episode 4 here, as somber as it may be. Hopefully we'll come up with some stuff here in the coming weeks to throw out an episode here or there. One thing we hadn't mentioned that kind of just happened before we started recording is Jeff Passan had released a tweet, kind of a general tweet. We don't really know what he's talking about. There's some speculation, but Apparently the players and Major League Baseball have come to an agreement on something. For very first read, I thought, oh my God, what are they taking care of the CBA in their off time? Well, no, I don't think it's that. I think most people think it has something to do with like service time and possible start date, something in there. So that will probably come out in the next day or so. We did not talk about it on this show. If it is something really important, we'll probably try and convene and talk about it somewhat. But that is out there. Who knows what that is at this point? But that is out there, and it should be explained in more detail in the next day or two. So thanks again for listening, everybody. You can, once again, email the show, brewersrundown@gmail.com. Feel free. We're getting some listeners, so I'm sure you have opinions. Let us know what you think. We're especially interested in what you think will be the fate of the 2020 season. brewersrundown@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram @BrewersWeekly. Like us on Facebook, call or text our voicemail line anytime, 24/7. Have your voice heard on the Brewers Weekly Rundown at 608-535-9302. Once again, we don't know when we'll put out a new episode, but just keep the feed on. Hopefully we'll come up with something. You can find me, Eric, on Twitter at Hazer, HAZER75. I'm not terribly active on there, but I will definitely answer if you tweet at me. Don't tweet a lot, but I definitely reply a lot. So that's a great way to get a hold of me. Thanks, Will. I'm glad everything's going well. You got... Neither Michael or I have had cases close to us like you have. Milwaukee, of course, the epicenter of the population in Wisconsin, so it is, of course, also the epicenter of the COVID-19 virus in the area. So glad you've made it this far, Will.
Thank you very much. And yeah, you guys just stay safe out there, and the faster we all can, do what we're being told and flatten the curve, the faster we actually can get things back. So hoping we continue on this path and can get things back as soon as we can.
Probably not the most opportune time for anybody to start smoking cigarettes. I would probably advise against that, Will. So put that pack down, Michael. Hope you're okay there. I hope things get moving for you. Financially with your big stimulus check and all this other great stuff. I was just laughing at Canada as I saw, or laughing at us more as I saw what Canada just passed for a stimulus package. But let's hopefully get some semblance of the economy going here in the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
I think it's just important that we all take this seriously for sure. And as Will said, the more people practice the social distancing and the more we flatten the curve, the better chance we have of getting some normalcy. But the more that doesn't happen, the longer it's going to be.
Yes, sir. Practice the social distancing, folks. If you don't have to go out, don't do anything silly. Hopefully we'll be back here sooner rather than later with some good news, or at least something to talk about here in the future. Thanks for listening to the Brewers Weekly Rundown podcast. We will see you soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Brewers Weekly Rundown. It is a 2020 production of the Flicksation Podcast Network. We will see you next time.